Hey, you're looking for a podcast where you can hear from some great hockey legends, hear them tell some great stories, find out what they're up to today? Well, this is it. It's a Domino's Pizza Overtime podcast. I'm your host, Gino Reda. Today's guest, he is a 5-time Stanley Cup champion. Along with legends Guy Lafleur and Jacques Lemaire, he played on one of the most dominant lines in NHL history. His 424 goals place him 5th on the Montreal Canadians all-time goal-scoring list. Inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1993. And you're going to love this. May have been the single most significant player in bringing together one of the greatest rock bands this country has ever known. Our guest is Steve Shutt. Steve, good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
Good, Gino.
I got to tell you, Shutter, I followed your entire career. I covered you as a broadcaster. I covered you even before I was a broadcaster as a hockey fan. But I never heard the story of how you were probably the single biggest factor in bringing the group Rush together. You got to tell the story because it's spectacular.
Well, I don't know if I was the biggest factor, but I introduced them. Let's put it that way. So I went to I was going to junior high school I was at R.J. Lang and in Fisherville Junior High, and I met Ged, who actually at that time was Gary Weinberg, and so he was kind of a, you know, how do I say it? Kind of a nerdy guy. And I was Joe Jacques, but, you know, we were kind of like totally opposites, but, you know, we started talking about music and we really got along well. And so it was, we actually, to the point where we actually went to see the Poppers. What's an old blast from the past in a Toronto band, and we saw Denny Gerard, and Denny Gerard was the bass player there, and he was just phenomenal, and he just blew us both away. So the next day we went and both bought bass guitars, and so it was a couple of weeks later. You know, I'm sitting there practicing, and I go over to his place, and I says, you know, what about this? What about that? Well, he says, I don't know any notes. And I said, oh, man, I got him now. And so I start playing some notes and stuff. And then what he did is he opened up his record player. And it was one of those old portable ones. You know, you had the speaker there and the record. So he started picking up all of the bass parts from the song. And he's just going boom, 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 boom. And I said, oh, I'm out of here. So that was the end of my bass career. So I think we both made good decisions. So anyways, you know, we started hanging around together, and then I'd met Alex Zibojunovic, and Alex was, where was he? He was not in the area. The school was being built there, so they were being bussed in. So
this is Alex Lifeson you're talking about now.
This is at Fisherville or R.J. Lang, one or the other. I can't remember at that time. And so that's when I introduced the two of them. And the interesting part was their drummer on the first group was John Rutsey. Well, his mom was our teacher at Fisherville. So it all kind of went around, you know.
The origins of Rush. You take bass guitar lessons with Geddy Lee, and then you introduce Geddy Lee to Alex Lifeson. It's unbelievable. Do you get like free tickets for life now for Rush or what?
Actually, I even did them some more favors. Their first album, when they did 2112, they went over to Wales and recorded it, and so I was over there. And the weather was just awful. It was terrible. And to the point when we got there, they were getting up at 5 in the afternoon because it rained all day. And so they record all night. And so it you know, it was interesting going there. Actually, the next farm over, Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath were recording. So, but they were going to go back there again to do, you know, in the Wales. They said, why are you going to Wales? I says, you know, Andre Perry Studios in Moraine Heights I said, the Stones are going there. David Bowie's going there. Like, why don't you guys go there? So they went there and they recorded their next 7 albums there. So, see, I got their career.
Who knew that you, Steve Shutt, Hockey Hall of Famer, also helped create some Hall of Fame rock bands? That's unbelievable, Shutt.
Well, they put the work in. Believe me. As I keep telling them, I says, you guys are the only 15-year overnight sensation I've ever seen.
Geddy Lee's funny because he talks about you. I'm sure you've heard the story before where he says Shutt was never much of a bass player, but he did okay in hockey.
Yeah, exactly. We both made the right decision.
Yeah, certainly did. You mentioned the fact that you grew up in Toronto. You played for then major junior team in the city, the Toronto Marlies, when they had a Toronto Marley team there, and you were a freaking rock star goal scorer for the Marlies. So you're a Toronto boy, and you go 4th overall in the 1972 draft to the Montreal Canadiens. What was that like?
Well, it was kind of interesting in the sense where, at that time, the Leafs were in turmoil. Like Harold had the team, and it was a little bit of a mess. So, and I would have liked to go on to Toronto, but maybe not. But the one thing going,
you won a Stanley Cup in your first year with the team. What do you mean you would have wanted to go to Toronto?
I know. Well, think about it this way. Okay, if I went to Toronto, it would have been the line of Shutt, Sittler, and McDonald.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, road when you end up playing with Guy Lafleur, brother. So
that's right. So, but going to Montreal, they had a great team, and it was like, well, they had a really good team. Am I going to make this team? And for the first couple of years, it was tough, but actually, it really not only developed me, but it got me. I wouldn't say hockey was easy, but I was used to success. Yeah. And so those 2 years where I really had to work at it put a different spin on the hockey being a job versus just going and playing.
Yeah, but it worked out really well for you.
Oh, yeah, it worked out great.
Yeah, you had a first couple of years where it was some adjustments, getting used to the Montreal Canadiens, walk into a dressing room with riddled with Hall of Famers. And at the same time, the year before you got drafted by the Habs, Guy Lafleur got drafted by the Habs. And Lafleur was supposed to be the new Jean Beliveau. So he had a difficult time adjusting himself until you got to the 1974-75 season, where the two of you guys playing together just exploded. For you, it was your first of 9 straight 30-plus goal seasons. For Lafleur, was his first year, first of 6 straight 50-plus goal seasons. What was it like to be a part of that line? And that year, when you had just come off of, in your own words, 2 kind of rough years from your background, to now all of a sudden you're playing with Lafleur 74-75, and you guys are unbelievable. You're the best goal scorers in the NHL.
Yeah, it was, hockey was fun again. But what it did, though, is, for me anyways, it put in perspective what I had to do to stay there, And, the hardest thing to do to play with somebody like Lafleur was, and this is a funny story, because we're sitting around one day and he says, when I get the puck, he says, I don't even think what I'm gonna. He says, I just go, because if I don't know what I'm gonna do, how's the other team gonna defend me? So I look at him and I said, well, how am I gonna play with you? And so he thought for a second and leaned over and he gave me a half smile and he says, well, that's your problem. and he was 100% instinctive player. You couldn't do a set play with him. So, and I think after, once we got some success, I think, Scotty realized that don't try and pigeonhole this guy into something. Just let him go, and don't Don't make things too complicated. Just let him play his game. And Scotty was great at that. He just let him go.
What was it like? I've heard you tell the story about Scotty. I mean, Scotty Bowman, legend, one of the greatest of all time, obviously. Phenomenal teacher. But some guys you don't need to teach. Tell the story about when he was trying to work on the power play with yourself and Lafleur, and what it was like for Scotty to try to get Lafleur to do certain set plays.
Well, again, he's 100% instinct player. So we started practice, and he said, "Okay, we're going to practice power play." And so you shoot the puck, and it go from Savard to Lafleur to Larry, and then Larry put it up to Lafleur. And Lafleur would be on the side of the boards, and all of a sudden you see his eyes just start going wide. It's like, what do I do now? And everybody would clear out because, he would panic and just like fire the puck. So, we'd screw it up. And then we go back. And then we screw it up again. And then finally, Scotty got so sick and tired of it. He said, "Get out of here." And then the next day, we'd score 2 goals on a power play, and everything was back to normal again. But, you just had to let him play.
Yeah, it's funny, Shutter, because every week we're so lucky with this podcast because I get to talk to a lot of the guys that I loved watching as a kid growing up and then broadcasting. And just to hear you throw out the names, he would pass the puck over to Serge Savard, we've had on this podcast before, or he would pass the puck to Larry Robinson, like one of the greatest of all time. Steve Shutt, one of the greatest of all time, Hockey Hall of Famer. At what point did it sink in? You walked into that Habs dressing room and you look around and go, "Holy crap, these are some of the greatest players of all time. So these are some of the guys I grew up watching play, the Mahavliches, the Lemaires, and all these guys." And then all of a sudden, you're one of them. Not only you're one of them, you're one of the guys that then guys say, "Hey, I played with that guy as well." What was it like to come up into something like that?
Well, it was pretty intimidating, when you first walk in. So when I walked into the dressing room the very first time, there was Frank Mahavlich, Pete Mahavlich, Lemaire, Savard, Kenny Dryden was there, Jacques Laperriere, Claude LaRose was there, Jimmy Roberts. But you just had all of these guys that have been around forever, Guy Lapointe. And you're looking around, and you either turn around and you say, "Okay, I'm going to be cocky as hell," or "I'm going to walk out of this room because I'll never fit." And that's what I did. I just walked in there and say, "Okay, this is it." And, I'm in the big time right now, so I better hold my own. And that's what you had to do. You couldn't get intimidated about it. On the other end of it, once we became, successful and we won, the 4 Stanley Cups in a row, we all knew we had a great team. Yeah. And, Scotty knew it. And, I think Scotty's goal was he knew there was one team that could beat us every year, and that was ourselves. And, and you've seen it, with different really good teams that wind up beating themselves. And Scotty just made sure that nobody got too high and nobody got too much above the rest of the team, and so he kept everything in perspective. And, the other end of it too, for the players themselves, as we started winning, the first cup and then the second cup in a row and then the third cup, it was like literally piano wires were starting to tighten up. And, we were not competing against the team that was on the ice. We were competing against what we did last year. We were competing against the team of 55, which, they were the greatest team. And so there was a lot of other pressures being put on the team at that time. And that, and that was tough. The third and the fourth cups that we had in a row, it was mentally tough.
I love how you just throw it out there. Yeah, the first cup in the string of 4 straight was one thing, and then the third and the fourth cup, dude, like it's legendary. It was a legendary run for you guys that all started in the 75-76 season. where you won your first of 4 straight. Now, you had already won a cup, but you barely had a cup of coffee with the Habs in your first season at that point. So now it's dramatically different.
I played one game of one shift. That's how I got my name on the ring, on the cup.
I know you only had the one shift. I knew you played one game, but you played one shift?
I played one shift against Philadelphia. And the thing was, I was the leading scorer against the Flyers that year. So Scotty put me out. One game, one shift.
And you
I don't think he trusted me defensively for the rest.
Get ready for the game with the Domino's $8.99 mix and match deal. Score big with any medium 2-topping pizza and any 2 items like pastas, stuffed cheesy bread, boneless chicken, or classic chicken wings. Domino's has you covered. Order today from Canada's favorite pizza at domino's.ca. Your first of the 4 straight Stanley Cups, though, you were a big part of it.
Yeah.
You had 7 goals, 15 points in 13 games. You play with Jacques Lemaire, and like Jacques Lemaire was your center with yourself and Guy Lafleur. So you were a part of it. You were a huge part of that Stanley Cup win. Now the clock ticks down to 0. You get to celebrate the Stanley Cup. What's that moment like for you at that point?
Each one is different, and everybody says that. The first one that of the 4. And that's when we beat the Flyers. And I think, we were happy, but I think the league was happy as well. Because if we would have lost that series, it would have gone back to the Slapshot era, the movie Slapshot. Everybody would have hired more tough guys. There would have been a lot more fighting in the game. And so I think, we were happy about that, and we're just happy. But as you get into, and then, second and the third one, we got into, playing against the Bruins. And that was always a battle playing against those guys. And, we, of all of the teams, we probably respected them the most. They were tough. And your tough guys, you couldn't wait. You couldn't wait for those guys to protect you because they were too busy with protecting themselves. Playing against the Bruins, like they were a tough team. They weren't dirty. They weren't dirty at all. But man, they came to play and they were tough. And so we really respected them. But that was those 3 games. And again, the wires start tightening. So then once you get into the 4th cup, it's like, we're at the king of the castle right now, and we're trying to fend off everybody. And, guys are getting older. And don't forget, we'd won 4 Stanley Cups. We'd had 2 Canada Cups in the middle of it. Absolutely. So literally,
Canada's ever.
We had 9 or 10 players that over the 4 years might have had 6 months off.
Oh.
So by the end of the 4th cup, guys were not only physically exhausted but mentally exhausted, and that's where Scotty left, Kenny left, Jacques left, Ivan was retired, but that's when we started the turnover right then. Guys were just beat.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you about the Canada Cup in a second because you're part of what is often considered the greatest team Canada ever, the 76 team. We'll talk about that in a second. But I remember Serge Savard, and we've had him on the show. I think I mentioned that. And he was being asked to compare you and Lafleur on the same line. Lafleur, he would just skate like the wind, his hair flying in the wind. He steps over the blue line of the faceoff circle and rips one in. You are the king of scoring a lot of goals through a lot of traffic. And there were some guys who said, well, Shutty's been pretty fortunate and got lucky with some bounces and stuff. But Savard said this: Steve's goals didn't come by luck. He was always at the right place, and that's not luck. You could have 10 rebounds and not be there for it, but Shutt was always there to put the puck in the net. Mm-hmm. And then you responded to that by saying, I'm the only guy that could score goals and make it boring.
Yeah, well, you know, I didn't have too many exciting goals. I had a couple, but not a lot. But Serge was right in the sense where I spent, what I was trying to do was play off of Guy. Oh. And this started in our own zone. First of all, the defense would never put it up Guy's side because he was never good there. So it would come up my side, and then I would try and hit him on the fly right at center ice. From there, now he's going down the ice full speed. Now I got to get my button gear to get going, and because I know he's going to do one of two things. He's either going to go, if he can break through, he's going to go in on a breakaway or one-on-one, and he's going to play it himself. Or two, he's going to stop, and then he's going to curl. And as soon as he curls, he's waiting for me, and he's looking for me. Well, everybody else is looking for him. He's looking for me, and I'm coming from behind. So, that we did that. I don't know how many times we did that. Again, we were just playing off each other. We knew where each other was. And that was the biggest part as well. We really didn't have to look where each other was. We just knew.
Can I remind you though of, and you don't need reminded of this because it was one of the prettiest goals you've ever scored. New Year's Eve, 1975. Yeah. You're playing the Soviet Red Army. And many people call it one of the greatest single hockey games of all time. And just to set the framework for this, remember, folks, this was a couple of years after the 72 Summit Series, where we first found out about the Russians, where we first found out about Vladislav Tretiak. Can you tell our audience about the slapper that you beat Tretiak with? Because that was no rebound, brother. That was a serious...
Oh, no, that was a highlight one. And so we're having this big buildup, and actually the Russians, they were in Montreal for the 2 weeks, okay, and they were just going to all the different cities to play, and then they come back. They were based in Montreal, so we got a chance to see them for about 2 weeks, and both teams knew that this was going to be the game. Both teams were waiting. So the old Montreal Forum, I mean, you could just feel the tension when you get, as soon as you hit the ice, the tension was right there. And so we dropped the puck in the first period, first shift. I think it was the first shift. Somehow I wound up on the off wing, and I took one stride in, just kind of a little bit over the blue line, and I just rifled one over Tretiak's shoulder, and he never even moved. And the funny part about that is whenever I meet Tretiak, from then on, whenever I met him, he'd look at me, he'd wave his hand up like that, and he'd smile, and he'd come over and shake my hand. Because he remembers it too.
He would never forget that. I tell you, that was awesome. That was an awesome ball. I want to ask you, I said I was going to ask you about this, and I got to ask you about this. The 1976 Canada Cup. Again, we're 4 years past the Summit Series. There were a number of the game's greatest players at that point who didn't get to play in the Canada-Russia series in 72. There's no doubt about it. That was the start of craziness in international hockey. It was unbelievable. But the 1976 Canada Cup team, Bobby Hull, Guy Lafleur, Lanny McDonald, Bobby Orr, Denny Potvin, Larry Robinson, Darryl Sittler, coached by Scotty Bowman. You won 4 straight Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadians. Was that the single best gathering, not as a team, not the single best team that worked as a group, but the single best gathering of talent for a single international event?
I would think so. I mean, if you looked at all the players, and at that time Bobby was in the WHA, they brought him over, and so I would go man for man. That was the best team that we could put in North America, and it was interesting because there was a lot of good players, and the hardest thing to do when you get that group is how do you form a bond and work together? And that's whenever you do these cups, that's the hardest thing to do. And if you look at right now, managers are putting teams together and you say, well, wait a minute, why did you pick that guy and that guy? Well, they're called bonders. They bond the teams. They might not be the best talent in the world, but they know that they're going to bring that team together. And so, management has learned, because it's very tough just to get all the best players and put them on the ice because they might not all blend together.
Yeah. I was talking to you before about playing with some of the great hockey legends. And listen, I've been around the game now for 40 years. I've been so blessed to have an opportunity to call you a friend, and pretty much everybody I've talked to in this podcast week after week, I've been able to develop personal relationships with. So I'm so spoiled about that. One of the greatest hockey players of all time, you didn't get a chance to, like he wasn't a teammate or anything, but Rocket Richard, you had a great relationship with Rocket Richard away from the ice. Tell us the story about how that all became a thing.
Yeah, so
he's my boyfriend.
That's my wife.
Did your wife just say that Rocket was her boyfriend? Is that what she said?
Yeah. See, so it was like Rocket was always a big fisherman. And so Nino's dad was a fisherman, and he was an ex-cop. And the police used to have their own fishing lakes up in Latoup. And so we used to go up there with Rocket because it was great fishing up there. So Rocket would go, and I'd see him all the time. And so like Nino's dad, they're the same age, and they used to. This was before
your father-in-law now, right?
That's my father-in-law, yeah. And so they used to get up in the morning about 6 o'clock in the morning and have their eye openers, which, nowadays what we used to take would be aspirin for kind of like arthritis and stuff like that. While they would just have these little shots of gin. and they're called eye openers. So every morning about 6 in the morning, they'd have numerous eye openers, and then they're ready to go fishing. But I got a really good chance to see to meet Rocket away from the game, and because he's a very quiet guy, but you could tell whenever you got into a situation where he didn't want to talk about something, he had those cold black eyes, and he'd just look at you. And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll just change the subject here." I remember one. We're up in James Bay, okay, and James Bay. We're playing an old timers game, and one of the CBC reporters, and I'm going to remember his name as I'm going here because he's still working, and he goes up and he's going to report on Rockets. I think it was the 30th year he scored 50 goals or something along that lines. So they got their whole crew up there, and their crew of about 5 people. It's $1,000 a trip to go up there. Oh yeah,
wow. It's a long time ago.
Oh yeah. So I'm sitting there, and so I'm talking with the guy again. I'm going to have to remember his name, and I'm saying, "Do you want to you want to talk to Rocket?" And he said, yeah. I said, well, the best time, I says, go to his place, knock on his door about 7 o'clock in the morning after he's had his eye openers, and then he's fine. And so he says, okay, great, thanks. So he goes there, knocks on the door, opens the door, they set up, here's Rocket having his eye openers. The first question, do you always have these eye openers every morning? Well, that was it. Get out of here. Get out of here. No interview, no nothing. They spent $5,000 and he kicked them out.
Yeah, no fires, man. The steely eyes, I agree with you. Like, if you've ever seen the pictures of Rocket Richard, folks, as hockey fans,
oh, yeah.
Google Rocket and you get that steely glare and you're like,
oh, yeah.
I'm not messing with this guy.
So I'm doing an autograph session with him one day in Detroit, and he's complaining because he's signing these pucks, and to sign a puck when you get older is very tough. You know, it's just awkward, and he's complaining. So I get the organizer, and I says, do you want Rocket to be happy? He says, oh yeah. I says, go and get a colored cup and put some Bull's gin in there and grapefruit, and then just hand it to him. So about 10 minutes later, he says, Mr. Richard, I have something for you. And he took one sip, and he says, how long do you want me to stay for? So it diffused the whole situation.
You are a legend. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm so glad. You look so good. It looks like you're feeling good. Before I let you go, though, and I know you've been very gracious with your time already, we like to play something we call 5 Fast Facts, where I ask you 5 quick questions. You give me the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you up for it?
Yep, sure.
All right. Time now for 5 Fast Facts with 5-time Stanley Cup champion, Hockey Hall of Famer Steve Shutt. Steve, who was the best teammate you ever played with?
Oh man, that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough, but it's probably Guy.
Fair enough. Who was the best coach you ever played for? Is that one also obvious?
No, Scotty for sure. As much as we used to say, we used to hate him for 364 days a year, and then the 365th day we would pick up our Stanley Cup check.
Yeah, fair enough. Who did you hate playing against the most, and why?
Who do we hate playing against? Probably Philadelphia. You know, Philadelphia for sure.
After all your success in your career on and off the ice, what's one piece of advice you would have given to yourself if you could go back and talk to your 15-year-old Steve Shutt self? What advice would you have given yourself?
You know what? I always criticized myself for being too cocky when I was young. But you know what? If I wasn't cocky, I wouldn't have got anywhere. So if you're 15, be cocky and stay cocky. That's the only way you're going to succeed.
Well said. One final question. If you hadn't been a professional hockey player, a Hockey Hall of Famer, and as successful as you were, what career do you think you would have had instead?
Well, it's quite obvious. I would have been a shitty bass player.
Well said. You took bass lessons with Geddy Lee. I think Geddy took the right direction, and so did you, my friend.
Hey, I got one more thing, though, before we leave. Serge, when you're talking about the 76 team, Serge Savard this summer is having a golf tournament, and he's bringing all of the living guys from 76 are going to be there. It's August. I believe it's like August 16th. I just got the flyer.
Where are you guys playing?
It's in the Mirage. Serge owns the Mirage. You know, it's Celine Dion's old golf course.
Serge owns a lot, my friend. He's done okay.
I believe it's August 16th. So that's going to be fun.
We'll Google that. That was 5 Fast Facts with Hockey Hall of Fame legend Steve Shutt. Shutter, thanks very much for this, buddy. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all this.
Thanks, Gino. Great to be here.
Our guest has been 5-time Stanley Cup champion, the guy who brought together Rush, one of the greatest Canadian rock bands in history, Steve Shutt. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by Domino's Pizza and Athlete's Care. If you're watching the big game at home or hungry right now, Domino's has you covered. Check out the Domino's Mix and Match deal. Medium 2-topping pizzas, pasta, stuffed cheesy bread, boneless chicken, or classic chicken wings. Any 2 items for only $8.99 each. Canada's favorite pizza at Domino's.ca. Athlete's Care is proud to be celebrating their 26th year offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athlete's Care Sports Medicine Clinics with 26 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and Ottawa. Hey, if you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca. The Domino's Pizza Overtime Podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. As well, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel at O-Time Podcast? Until next week, I'm Gino Retta saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the Domino's Overtime Podcast.